Okay. All right, people starting to come in. Love to see it. Oh, hi, Margot. We did an event with Margot. She's lovely. Okay, well, I'll wait a second before I give my spiel about the bookstore till it's actually 7 p.m.
And Kate, they said you might want to do a little reading. When do you want to do that? Beginning?
I usually just start with that. I kind of read the first 3 pages.
Awesome. So I will get us started now. So hi, everyone. I'm Emma. I am a bookseller at Belmont Books in Belmont, Massachusetts. We're a small independent bookstore in Massachusetts. So thank you so much for joining us. We are so excited about tonight's event with Kate and Petra. So let me tell you about a few events we have coming up. So tomorrow we're really excited to have a panel on YA duologies. So every author has like 2 books and they're all on their second book, and they're all coming to talk about them. They're all fantasy, and it's hosted by BuzzFeed's Rachel Stroll. So that's pretty cool. And then next week on Monday, we have Patty Callahan in conversation with Whitney Scherer. And Patty is talking about her book, Surviving Savannah. I was like, that's a tongue twister. Don't want to say it wrong. Had to reread it. So I'm just going to read a little spiel about both of our author and our in-conversationalist, I suppose is what we will call her. So Kate Russo grew up in Maine, but now divides her time between Maine and the UK. She has an MFA in painting from the Slade School of Fine Art, and while living in London, she worked with a theater group, Love Bites, who presented 2 of her short plays, The Blind and Bernie's Night Off, at the Calder Bookshop Theater. She exhibits widely in the United States and England. She currently lives in Portland, Maine. And then Petra Mayer is an editor and the resident nerd at NPR Books, focusing on fiction and particularly genre fiction. She brings to the job passion, speed reading skills, and a truly impressive collection of Doctor Who doodads. You can also hear her on the air and on the occasional episode of Pop Culture Happy Hour. And we were also visited by Petra's 3 cats, who may show up intermittently. But now I will turn the event over to these 2, and I will come back. Oh, one more thing. Remember, you can ask questions of the authors. You can do it either in our chat or there's a little Q&A option. It's really up to you and what you feel comfortable, where you feel comfortable putting your question. And then I'll come back at some point and read them to Kate and Petra. So without further ado, turn it over to these 2.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that introduction. I'm very excited for your fantasy panel tomorrow. That was great.
I know you're going to be signing up for that.
I know, me too. I think I've read some of these books too. I'm looking at it on the website right now.
All right.
So, what just happened to me? Oh, I see. I guess it's just us now.
Yeah.
So you want to start with a reading, yes?
Yes, yeah, no, I thought I'd read from the first 3 pages so that people can kind of get a sense of what we're about to talk about. So yeah, I'm going to start right from the beginning. The demons you're stuck with. In the hierarchy of linen stains, blood is at the top. Everyone thinks semen is the worst, but they're wrong. They only think this because of that popular TV show where inspectors take a black light to a hotel room and it lights up neon yellow, indicating bodily fluids all over the bedding. Since that report, people automatically throw off the bedroom or the bedspread in a hotel room, assuming it's drenched in some stranger's spunk. It probably is. That's why Bennett Driscoll prefers to use a duvet cover in his rentable 4-bed house. Soap, hot water, and a rigorous spin cycle will scrub all the manhood out of a duvet cover. It's the stains you can detect with the naked eye that are the real problem. When Bennett throws back the duvets on checkout day, it's the sight of blood he fears most. Fuck. And there they are, halfway down the fitted sheet, only a couple drops worth, but on Bennett's bright white sheets, they stand out like a red scarf discarded in snow. Their removal will require a lot of bleach and a lot of scrubbing. Recently, he bought a nail brush, or for his purposes, a blood brush, to combat the really stubborn stains. In the beginning, he would just throw away the visibly soiled sheets and buy new ones. But now, a year into renting his house out, his suburban London house out on Airbed, he has thrown away 5 sets of perfectly good sheets. Bleach is cheaper. He pulls the fitted sheet from the corners, wadding it into a ball in the center of the bed. If the blood has transferred onto the mattress pad, that's double the work. Damn it. Recently, Bennett was awarded the status of superhost on the Airbed website, an honor he's earned from having a quick response rate and excellent reviews. Though it's never been his aspiration to become a host, he'd be lying if he said he didn't like that little medal next to his name. Until 2 years ago, Bennett was a full-time artist who never stuttered over answering the question, "What do you do?" In fact, nobody ever needed to ask him. He was well-known painter Bennett Driscoll. Everyone knew that. Okay, maybe not everyone, but enough people that he didn't have to worry about renting his house out to tourists. Unfortunately, things change. Tastes change. It used to be that anything he painted would sell. In 2002, there was a waiting list. Now, 16 years later, there are more than 100 paintings in storage. His last solo show was in 2013. The critic for The Guardian wrote, "Driscoll cares so little for the current trends in painting that one wonders if he concerns himself with the contemporary art world at all." That pissed Bennett off, mostly because it was true. But a bad review is better than no review. He realizes that now. Since art critics don't review his work anymore, Bennett pores over his Airbed reviews as though it's the Sunday Times, scouring each for a new and nuanced understanding of his hosting skills. More often than not, they go like this. Bennett was a welcoming and gracious host. Bennett was very helpful. Bennett has a beautiful home, and looking forward to staying at Bennett's house again the next time we're in London. They're not exactly Times quality, but nevertheless, it's nice to be reviewed favorably. Hey, it's nice to be reviewed, full stop. Sometimes he wonders if his ex-wife Eliza ever goes on Airbed to read his reviews. Probably not. If she left a year ago to live in America with a hedge fund manager named Jeff, taking with her steady salary in publishing that until the divorce had been paying their bills. That's when Bennett decided to move into the studio at the end of his garden and rent the family home on Airbed. He doesn't think his superhost status would impress Eliza. Almost nothing impressed her. He wishes someone would write, "Bennett has a beautiful home. He was the perfect host. No, the perfect man. Exciting, interesting, and handsome in equal measure. He would make an excellent husband. I even bought several of his paintings because I believe they are the pinnacle of contemporary art." No such luck yet.
You're so hard on Bennett's painting, or at least the critics are. But when I read your descriptions of what his work looked like, I was like, I would buy that in a heartbeat. It sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
All the fabric textures and the still lifes. I want that.
Yeah. I love his painting, but it's that thing where, number one, he probably would have been, given his fame and what he'd achieved, they would probably cost, about $50,000. They're not in the realm of what you and I would be able to just go into a gallery and afford. And I think that, when you fall out with that crowd, I think it happens pretty quickly.
Yeah, that was expecting that his downfall seemed to be kind of fast. I also, you were just, as you were reading, and I didn't even notice this until you were reading it, the opening is so visual. It is almost a painting itself, the red blood on the white. Was that?
Yeah. So I had color in mind the whole time. I always wanted to that was one of the first things that I thought about, every time any character entered a room. It was what are the colors in this room? what are we looking at? And when I think about anything, I think that's how I naturally think about it as a painter is, well, what color is it?
And actually, that was what I wanted to ask. I mean, you are a visual artist yourself.
Yeah.
So how did that influence the creation of Bennett and the book in general?
Well, I knew that I wanted to, so the two main things that Bennett and I have in common are that we're both artists and we were both superhosts. So that was what I wanted to do, was kind of create a role, particularly I particularly wanted to put a man in the position that I was in, as a struggling artist who couldn't get shows, who couldn't get reviews. I had this feeling that, this felt like a particularly female problem. Of course, there are plenty of male suffering artists, but there's less of them than there are of the women. So that was kind of it. I sort of created him out of spite, which I didn't really mean to do, but I just wanted to create this man who was being put in the position that I felt that I was in. But of course, he ended up being incredibly lovable once I got to know him.
I thought he was a putz, at least until part of the way through, and then you kind of got deeper into his character, and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Where did Roots Manuva come from? That was a great detail.
Yeah, I mean, he's just absolutely, I mean, I just love him. I mean, that was, he's, for anybody who doesn't know, he's a real British rapper. And he's about Bennett's age. And I think that was part of it, was that I wanted him to get into somebody who was sort of having the same life experiences that he was. And as a rapper, he's always combining heartache with humor, and that's pretty much at the heart of every single song that he writes. And so I knew that I wanted that to be kind of the beating heart of this book, was that moment where you don't know whether you want to laugh or cry. And that's kind of where Bennett is. And so when he hears that music for the first time, he thinks, I have to know what this is.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because I'm looking at my carefully prepared notes here and my questions, and that was one thing that struck me, actually, is that this is a comic novel, but there's some really intense moments in it.
Yeah.
So I mean, you kind of almost answered my question. I wanted to know why it was important to you to have these very bitter moments within the structure of a comic novel, but also how you approach finding that balance.
Yeah. I mean, I think again that might just be the painter in me. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and it was, and I think every painter knows instinctively that you have to balance light and dark. And I just started doing that in this book pretty much from the beginning. I just thought, okay, well, with everything, with every joke, there needs to be also a kind of sentiment of why this also hurts. And that, more often than not, if you want to be honest, some things are honestly funny and they're just funny, and that's great, and there's not much else to them. But most things that are funny have a basis in something that's not that funny. And so I wanted to be able to show both sides of that coin.
I want to go back to your background as a visual artist, actually, because you mentioned that now. And I looked up some of your paintings, and actually they reminded me a little bit of Emma's work in the book, the mathematical precision of it. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering, A, am I right about that?
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. Yay, me. And B, one of the things that you often hear about writers is that this is a George R. Martin thing. He says there's either architects or gardeners. There are people who plan precisely, and there are people who just toss seeds in and see what comes up. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering whether sort of the mathematical precision of your painting translates into your plotting at all.
I think it does. I think it does a little bit. So as a painter, yeah, everything is incredibly precise. I have schedules. I know how long it takes me to make something. So yeah, every painting that I work on comes with a plan. The writing has not been that precise, but in order to write this book, I had to have a pretty good sense of what I wanted the structure of it to be, or otherwise I wouldn't have ended up where I did. So that idea that this novel goes from Bennett's perspective to the guest's perspective and then back to Bennett. So I knew that I wanted to do that early on, and that I wanted you to be able to see him. I wanted you to be able to see the world through his eyes, but then equally, I wanted you to be able to see him through other people's eyes. So that was very much planned. And the idea that the guests would be women and that they would be in different stages of their lives, that was also very much planned. But other than that, I just kind of let them lead me. And that was fun because I can't do that as a painter.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of writers who say the same thing, that their characters boss them around.
Yeah, it really feels like that, yeah.
Did you know where you were going to end up? Did you have the ending planned out?
No, not at all.
Cool.
No, I did not. I had no idea where he was going to end up. So that was fun. That was fun to kind of arrive there together.
That's interesting to me, because one of the things that I thought of when I was reading and I was looking at sort of the three women and Bennett's experiences with them, is that it almost felt like a fairy tale. Like, you know how like fairy tale heroes have three challenges usually,
yeah.
and you know, there's the goddess of the sun, the goddess of the moon, and the goddess of the stars, or something like that. Yeah. You know, was that something you were thinking of?
I mean, I wasn't at all, but it was funny. I was having a couple weeks ago, I was doing an event and I was talking to Tom Perrotta, and he said that it reminded him of you know, in a Jane Austen novel where this kind of parade of men goes past her and she has to kind of pick which one. But I kind of did a gender flip on that, and I just thought, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it didn't occur to me. Largely because I didn't really know as I was writing what these romantic connections and insinuations were going to be. So I knew that because you learn early on that he's attracted to Alicia, who's the first guest, but that he feels wrong about that because she could be his daughter. But beyond that, I didn't know sort of what these women were going to be to him as they came in and out. So, but I think you're right. It does have that sort of structure of each challenge is a little bit bigger than the last.
So tell me a little bit more. I mean, you talked about Alicia. It's my cat. Let me get rid of him. They go away. Sorry. Tell me a little bit more about these three women, if you can do so without being too spoilery. They're all very different.
Yeah. So I start with Alicia, and she's the youngest of the three women that come to stay, and she is she, I think, kind of encapsulates the heart of the book pretty early on, in the sense that her story is, I think, the most obviously about loneliness. And that is what all of the characters share. They all share a sense of loneliness, but with her, it's really, really acute. It's by far the biggest problem in her life, is that she can't seem to live or be where she is. So she's always got one foot somewhere else, and she can't figure out how that links to her not really having any friends. So that's Alicia's story, and of course, when you learn more about Bennett, you'll understand how he relates to that story. And then Emma and her husband are the next guests, but for family reasons, Emma's husband Theo isn't around. And so Emma's kind of kicking around this big house all by herself. She doesn't particularly want to be there. And I decided early on that one of the dynamics that I wanted to have in this chapter was that I wanted her to really dislike Bennett, and vice versa. So it's kind of, in a lot of ways, it couldn't be more different from Alicia, in the sense that Alicia was completely intrigued by him. He was intrigued by her. I think they both felt that they were too nervous to get to know each other better, whereas Emma just really wants nothing to do with this man, and he is very sort of turned off by her, and I get to play with the art aspect of that too, because Emma is an artist. She makes, like I do, incredibly precise work, and Bennett is much more, he's a figure painter. Everything is very, it's just not nearly as, I'm sure it is precise, but it's not, it's got a flow to it. in a way that doesn't have the kind of mathematical precision of Emma's work. And so they just butt heads. And I think a couple of times they try to talk about art and they just can't even have a conversation about it. They're just so not in each other's camp. So that's Emma. And then the final guest is Kirsty, who is kind of, I think maybe it's sort of a female Bennett. And he recognizes that they're on a very similar path. She is recently divorced, with fairly dark circumstances surrounding that, and they strike up a much more kind of genuine friendship and relationship that becomes complicated for reasons that I won't give away. But
I feel like she's one step further than him, because at least until he starts learning more about himself, one of his defining traits is this: everybody's always asking him, what do you want?
Yeah.
Things just happen to him, where at least I felt Kirsty had taken an action in her life.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's that's one of the things that she's trying to communicate to him is that I actually have something to teach you if you're paying attention. But that's also one of the problems with Bennett, is that he's rarely paying attention when he should be, and almost always paying attention when he shouldn't be. And so he's got a, he's a bit of a spire. He's a bit voyeuristic. But then when somebody is actually saying, pay attention to me, he's off with the fairies thinking about something else. So that is, I think Kirsty's the one who kind of helps him to realize that.
Yeah, that sort of crystallized for me in the moment where he's painting Claire, who's another one of the women that you talk about. And there's a whole thing about how he's gotten her boobs right, but he can't get her expression, her facial expression right.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what she was thinking.
Yeah. And that's his big problem, is that he cannot figure out what women are thinking. And he has studied the anatomy all throughout art school. He knows how to paint a woman. He knows the proportions. He understands all of that, but he has no idea what's going on in their heads. And that was a late development for me as I was writing it, because I had started off saying that he can't capture an expression, but I didn't really know why. And so that was part of the journey that we went on together, as I also felt equally mystified by, why can't he do this? And I think it, again, it was one of those things where you give your characters certain aspects of yourself. And I think that was probably part of myself that I gave to him, which is, that I don't think I could paint a face and accurately describe how someone is thinking either. So that's definitely something we have in common.
I do try to avoid like the sort of facile, like, I see aspects of you, I have done research on your background, and I can see this in your work, but I do feel like what I know of you from having done some background research, that I did feel like there were aspects of your life and experiences that were reflected in this book.
Yeah. I mean, I think most writers are the kind of, either you write what you know, or you specifically don't write what you know. And so I'm very much in the write what you know camp, for sure.
And so you actually were an Airbnb host. You were a super host like that.
Yeah.
Sorry. It's his dinner time. Where was I?
Airbnb.
Right. So,
yeah.
And the thing so the house that you were an Airbnb host, that was your family home or a family property?
Yeah. So my family owned this house, and we lived in it for many, many years. And then my parents decided that they wanted to move, and my sister and I were grown up and out of the house by that point. But the house just, they had it on the market, and the house just wouldn't sell. And it was in this kind of a little town in Maine called Camden, which couldn't be more idyllic. It's right by the water. It's full of tourists every summer. And so we thought, well, I mean, let's try putting it on Airbnb. Let's see what happens. And, I was a struggling artist at the time, not making much money. And it was kind of like, well, I could do this, or I could go back to tending bar, which is the other thing that I've done an incredible amount of in my life. And so I thought, well, let's just give this a try. And then as soon as we sell it, and I'll be done with it. And it just ended up being this really illuminating experience to rent out a house to other people, and then to come back into it, a house that you've spent so much of your life in, and then to come back into it and see the way they've rearranged the furniture and it smells different, and you have this kind of sense of, it's part like you've been invaded, like somebody's robbed your house, and it's also just pure curiosity. What were they doing? What were they like? How did they use the space? And that was really just how the whole idea of this book got born, was that I wanted to think about a space that exists in two ways. And then but I'm also a frequent Airbnb renter, because I spend so much time in London, and I don't own any property over there. So every time we go, we rent something. And so I'm on the other side of the transaction. I'm the renter, and I have a host, and I'm going into their house. And so I just felt like I was in a perfect position of being on both sides of this world. And yeah, so that was kind of how it came to be.
I really love the way, and I guess this experience fed into it, you captured the sense of sort of home and not home that it has about its house. That I can only, like in my life, I've only experienced going back to a place where I don't live anymore, where it once was your place. You know, I used to live overseas, I used to live in Prague, and I knew it so well. I walked over the cobblestones every day to work. I lived there for 2 years. And I go back sometimes, and I'm like, it's wonderful, but it's also sad and uneasy, because it was my place and now it isn't.
Yeah, and I think that's very much Alicia's experience as well, when she goes back to London. So she was a student in London, and then went back to the States, and she comes back, and that's exactly what she's trying to do, is recapture what her life was like when she lived there. And so she walks past the flat that she lived in. She tries to go to the pubs that she loved when she was there. And she just keeps getting met with this awful kind of heartache, nostalgia feeling of just, this isn't yours anymore.
Luckily, the bar I used to hang out in is closed. So
Yeah.
I don't have to deal with that, at least. I do want to ask though, when you were a superhost, did you observe your tenants as closely as Bennett watches?
No. No,
if you're a writer, you want to watch people, right?
Yeah, no, I absolutely do it, but there were a lot of things that that I was able to take from, little conversations that I would have with them over, before, right before they're about to rent. That kind of language, that style of conversation that you have with somebody that you don't know at all, except for the fact that they know their way around your house. So that they're that kind of, so I took a lot of that from experience. But no, I never met, we had a lockbox. I never met any of them. And I think that was probably, I don't regret that for a second, because it's
so you weren't living in a studio in the garden.
No.
But I do want to ask, like, this is something that I like to ask writers, and you guys have a double whammy because you're a writer and a painter. Does it change the way you move through the world and the way you look at things? I mean, obviously, when writers do that, I imagine they're looking for details or stories or ideas. Mm-hmm. And you're also a painter on top of that. So how does it affect the way you just walk around and look at the world?
I always worry that it just makes me an asshole, because I just find myself thinking I'm going to steal everything. And so I'm listening to conversations, and I just want to write it down. I just want, and so anytime I think people probably are going to want to stop talking to me, because they're just thinking, well, I don't trust her with anything that I say, because she's going to write it down and it's going to appear in a book. So in that way, as a writer, I feel much, much more like a thief. But both things are so detail oriented that in a lot of ways they're not that different, or at least they're not for me. You have to have that kind of, you have to be obsessive. You have to want to paint, for me, paint the same square 10 times, 10 different shades until you get it right. Same thing, when you're writing, you have to write that sentence 10 times before you get it right. and you're probably still going to hate it when you're done. And so yeah, I mean, I think that I think that that's kind of how I see the world, is just in a fairly obsessive way that I think probably makes me miss an awful lot too, because when you really hone in on what you're writing or what you're painting, I can only imagine that a lot of the world probably passes me by depending on what I'm working on.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't really think about that, but I guess if you're working so finely and so obsessively, as you say,
Yeah.
it's easy to sort of think that the world might be passing you by.
Yeah.
One thing I'm also really interested in when it comes to the sort of dual disciplines of painting and writing, is that they're different languages, basically. Like storytelling on a canvas is very different from storytelling on a page. At least I think it is. Was it for you? How did you translate between the two languages?
Well, I do this funny thing when I'm painting, which is really started happening more and more now that writing is part of my sort of full-time job, full-time life. So I've started describing my paintings to people as being narrative abstraction, because I kind of think of them, and the way that I work on them is this sort of the same way that you would work on a novel, and they can essentially be read the way you would read a book. And so a lot of what I do is I work with art historical palettes, and I essentially steal them, copy them, because that's my expertise, is color matching. And so I will use these palettes. So if I might be using, I have one painting where I'm taking palettes all from paintings of women who are just about to have bathed or just about to bathe. So they're all, women in various states of undress standing in front of tubs for the most part.
But I do, guys looking at them.
Exactly. So all of these paintings are about the male gaze, and that's part of where Bennett came from as well. But I start early on in art history in like the 1500s, and then work my way to kind of the 1950s usually. So there's 400, 500 years of art history in one of my panels that can be read chronologically. And all of that gets explained in an exhibition format so that people can sort of see what I've done. But I do think about it very, very narratively.
That's so interesting. I mean, I did go back and look at some of your paintings, and I saw the series of paintings of women in bathtubs, or about to get into bathtubs. But it didn't occur to me to sort of read them like an actual story.
Yeah.
I think they're chronological.
Yeah, they're chronological. So so I start, the top left or the top right hand corner is like 1500s roughly, and then all the way down, and you just can kind of read it like this. And I also kind of think of them a little bit like you would, if you're going to the theater, a playbill. It has all the actors in the back, and they're also meant to be kind of portraits of who the artist was who painted the original painting. Who are of course
comic strips, actually.
Yeah, but again, very narrative. And that's how I've started thinking as a painter who has always been abstract. I've always worked abstractly, but just in the last 5 or 6 years, it's been very much about how can I weave the concept of narrative into the way I paint.
You talk about being a very abstract painter, and then of course you've also created this very concrete person and story. If you had to like identify a moment in that timeline of palettes where Bennett popped up, what would it have been?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I mean, I always think about him kind of coming. He was so much a part of that time where I was cleaning and running that Airbnb, that I always think of him on that timeline. But it's interesting, like, what exactly was I painting when he came around? And I think I was probably working on a much smaller scale. But still, that work is incredibly monotonous to do. So a lot of times what happens is if I'm working on a painting and I know what I'm doing, and I basically just have to paint the same color over and over and over again, it allows me to write at the same time, sort of, not on paper, but in my, I can write dialogue in my head while I'm painting. And so I do remember that there's that scene in the first chapter where he goes to his daughter's art exhibition. And I wrote most of that in my head while I was doing a painting of my own in the studio. And fortunately was able to kind of come back home and sort of scribble it all down on a piece of paper. So those types of things were happening early on, and has sort of come to be a part of my process now. When I'm in the studio painting, I'm often thinking to myself, oh, I hope I can work out that problem that I'm having in the plot of whatever I'm working on.
It's funny that you mentioned that scene where Bennett goes to see his daughter's painting, because
Yeah.
normally I don't ask people about their parents, but your dad is also a writer.
Yes.
And that came to me in that scene because it's Bennett going to see his daughter, who's also a painter, and wondering if she has talents. And I thought,
Yeah.
oh God, I hope that didn't come from real life.
That thankfully, no. I did not paint that painting. But that kind of that sort of shared relationship of choosing to do what it is that your parent does. And actually I've come to writing professionally very late because I was trying so hard not to fill those shoes or attempt to fill those shoes. So, but there is a kind of, relationship to him coming to see my shows, sharing that sense of creativity, even though we were doing different things. But then it ended up weirdly mirroring because he was the first reader on this book. So I sort of felt a little bit like, handing over a pile of some, weird sex scenes to my dad and saying, can you edit these? Wasn't really that far off what Bennett's daughter was asking her dad about this painting. So yeah,
It's a very graphic painting that we are glad to learn is not of her.
Yes.
So you and your dad actually worked on a book together.
We did, yeah.
Do you think Bennett and Mia would ever work on anything together?
I'd like to think so. I think they're really good friends. And I think that's, again, I really had no other choice but to do that because that's very much the case for me and my dad. So I in the writing what that's what I know. So that's I absolutely think that they're in that weird place there. I think, because I'm so much older than Bennett's daughter is in the book. That she's in that position where she's really trying to assert her authority in their relationship. I think she, now that his wife has left, I think she kind of wants to parent him. She wants that flip to happen. And I think that's sort of what happens when you're in your 20s. You want your parent to know, I'm an adult now and I can handle this and I can take care of you. And I'm, I'd like to think that we're past all that now with my parents, and we're just sort of in the friend zone now. But she's in that area. So I don't think they're quite ready to collaborate on something yet because I think they would probably disagree. But yeah, in maybe 5 or 6 years' time, I think they could.
How was it working with your dad and mixing personal and professional in that way?
It was absolutely fine because we were doing that book that Petra is referring to is a book called Interventions that we did probably 2012, something like that. And our roles were essentially so separate that we didn't really have a whole lot of things to butt heads about. So it's a book where of 4 short stories that my dad has written. And then I did 4 paintings to go along with them, and then also designed the covers for these little individual booklets. So, he really let me have free reign in terms of what I wanted to do. I just sort of picked a scene from each story and did a painting for it. And it's some of the most illustrative painting I've ever done. Probably is the most illustrative painting I've ever done.
I really hope Bennett and Mia will collaborate on something. The moment in the book where I finally kind of softened towards him was when he takes Mia's friend out, Richard, for coffee.
Yeah.
After Richard, well, I don't want to give away too much of the plot.
Yeah. Yes. He finally really
his friend.
Yeah.
That Bennett doesn't like, and Bennett does something really nice for him after he does something really nice for me, and then I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I love his daughter.
Yeah, and he finally realizes the value of Richard. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So he takes an action, like he makes a choice and he does something.
yeah.
So we've talked about sort of artistic influences. I also want to ask sort of what books you may have had in mind, what literary influences went into this, because when I was reading, when you're reading books about British man babies, you got to think Nick Hornby, right?
Yes, yes.
What kind of literary influences were in your mind when you were?
Yeah, I mean Nick absolutely is in there, and Tom Perrotta as well. That kind of this, the other thing that I like about Tom as well is that he is much more willing to do a gender flip. So he likes to explore the female character, and so that gave me a lot of courage to do this with Bennett as well, and do that flip. But the other things that were really on my mind, even though they couldn't be any more different, is any kind of book that really is sort of a novel in short stories. I absolutely love that format. And so the original drafts of Superhost were a little bit more like that, in the sense that each chapter could also have been a short story sort of published on its own, and we ended up bringing everything together a little bit more. But but in terms of, all of Kittredge is just one of my absolute favorite books, and then much before that, Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, as well as one of my favorite books. So I had both of those in mind, in terms of structure. I mean, stylistically, and tone, they're obviously very different, but
I can see the structural thing. I mean, it does read a little bit like there are three discrete sections for each woman.
yeah,
And then the connecting thread is what's going on in the background with his relationship with Claire, who we haven't really talked about because I don't want to spoil too much. But I mean, tell us just a little bit about Claire.
Yeah, so Claire, Claire is introduced sort of, a little early-ish on, and it's again, I think it's another one of those moments that's important, because again, Bennett is sort of making a decision, and he has to, yeah, he has to go out and buy, if he wants another cup of tea, he has to go out and buy some tea. He realizes that his favorite color, his favorite tube of paint has run out. And so he needs to leave the house, and he needs to go get the things that he needs in order to continue working. And he sort of decides, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to stay out because I never do this. And he goes to this little bar and decides to pull out his sketchbook. And I think he's thinking it's going to be really busy and he'll just sketch people, and ends up being really quiet in there. And so he settles on sketching the barmaid, who is Claire. And she catches on very early to what he is doing and sort of razzes him for it. And she's kind of, she really, they're kind of polar opposites. So it's the opposites attract thing going on there, for sure.
I also love, you mentioned, he runs out of his favorite color of paint. Oh, yeah. We're almost out of time, actually, because it's almost time to go to the audience. But I really wanted to ask him. There are all these little details that are so, like, his favorite color of paint is brown ochre.
Yeah.
Like, are those from your experience? Because they're so, like, keenly observed little moments, or like the moment when his gallery tells him, we're not going to represent you unless you die.
Yeah. So that's absolutely true. Galleries do that now. That is, I won't say it's standard practice, but it happens for sure. And the brown ochre is, for me, one of those colors where I wouldn't call it my favorite color, but you almost always need it. So anything that you're mixing, we always think of, we think of the spectrum of colors, but most reds have some green in them, and most blues have some orange in them, and everything is much more neutral than we think it is. And so when you're mixing color and you're trying to match something, one of the easiest ways to get there is by throwing some brown in. And so that's why brown ochre is kind of, he always needs it, because he always needs to mute or tone down whatever he's doing. So it's kind of, it's nobody likes the color brown ochre, but it's the tool that he needs to get where he's going. Yeah.
It reminded me of there's a historical sort of magical realist novel that I love called The Serpent Garden by Judith Riley, and it's about a woman who's a miniature painter at the court of Henry VIII, or actually the court of Cardinal Wolsey. And she goes to France in the train of Cardinal Wolsey and gets involved in all kinds of intrigues. But what I love about it is, she's the daughter of a Flemish miniatures painter, and she's always talking about how she's mixing her colors and how, oh, that painter's shadows are so muddy because he uses actual black and you should never use black. And there's an ongoing thing in the book about how she needs to capture the rainbow in her hand, and she realizes at the end that the rainbow of colors is what make up human skin tone.
That was one of the first, and I can't remember whether it's in this book or not. It was at one point, but I had a lesson in painting when I was in college where the professor said, we had a museum attached to the school, and we would go around and look at all the portraits, and really the lesson was just about how blue our skin is, and because of our veins, and we all tend to paint a kind of rosy color, or because most paintings, let's face it, most of art history is paintings of white people, so that tone is very specific. And so she was showing us basically how to cool it down, that it's not a rosy color, it's more of a blue. So yeah, it's one of those
in science fiction, they call it world building, all those little details that make the space seem real.
Yeah,
people don't really pay attention to the fact that it happens in realistic fiction too.
Yeah.
But to me, that's solid world building.
Yeah.
So it's 7:45, which they said would be time for us to go to the audience for some questions. So hi, Emma. Welcome
Hello,
back.
I'm back. So if there are no questions, feel free to continue your conversation. That's fine. But people in the audience, we invite you to go into the chat or the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and ask questions of Kate and Petra, because they would love to answer them for you.
Especially to Kate, because she was the author.
That's true. Yeah. It's like, where are your cats now?
Oh, my roommate fed them, so now they are off my case. I had to text him and beg him.
We've got a question from Sarah. How are you managing this uber public experience as an introvert? Great question.
Sarah knows me well enough to know that I'm an introvert. It has been when you spend so much time in a world and you really invest yourself in it, and it doesn't actually involve any people that are real. I find that switch to be really hard and really tiring. I think that's the word that I've been saying to most people, is I just feel so tired, because it's really hard to talk to anybody about sort of people that really only exist in your mind, but now exist in their minds too. So I have my Alicia, but now you also have your Alicia, and we have to kind of share her. And I find that experience of having to share these characters, it's sometimes really rewarding and other times just incredibly daunting. And I think the same thing happens in painting as well. You put a painting out into the world and people interpret it a certain way, and it even if you love what they're saying, it doesn't even have to be that somebody doesn't get it, but even if you love what they're saying, it's such an exhausting feeling, because it's everything. And I think that's something that that's why I like talking to other writers and other artists about what that's like, because it's like somebody saying, they like your child or something. It's very all encompassing. And but it's also another weird world where this is happening, and I'm it's all happening on Zoom. I mean, like, we're not even really meeting people anymore. So I'm introverted, but I'm sort of exposed, but I'm not really exposed because I'm on Zoom. So, yeah, it's a weird one.
It's definitely a weird time to be like out releasing a book, especially because you can't go and visit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sarah has another comment, which I'm not going to read because we're going to eventually put this on YouTube. So I had a question. Are you in the process of writing any new stories, or do you think Superhost, you're like, this is it.
Oh, no.
I've finished.
No, definitely not. No, that was I would probably say is the main silver lining for me of this pandemic. And this book was postponed as well. It was supposed to come out in June. So I had 8 months to really sit down and write another, really start writing another book. And being able to do that without really having a whole lot of criticism or opinion come out on this one was really great, because there was no distraction, and there was none of that kind of sort of feelings of fear or being inadequate that come into any process of writing. I mean, it's there no matter what, but there was less of it because I was still, nobody knew who I was writing my second book, but nobody knew who I was. So it was kind of all right. I had the privilege of that sort of debut novel, nobody knows who you are, feeling while I've been writing it. So yeah, I've actually gotten pretty far along in it. It's been good.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I assume it's like a totally separate story.
Well, I won't say couldn't be more different. Obviously it's been written by me, so it's got to be at least a little bit. But yeah, no Bennett, none of these characters are involved. So
Got it.
Can you give us a little hint?
It takes place in Maine, so it's not over in the UK.
180.
This is a takes place in Maine, and it's a campus novel. Most of it takes place on a college campus. So yeah, it's got some of that fun stuff.
My best friend went to college in Maine, and I used to go visit her, and we go contra dancing. That's what I know about college in Maine.
Yeah.
I hope there's some contra dancing here.
I've been grown up in Maine, and I've still never gone contra dancing. I think you either do it. It's one of those things. You either do it or you don't. Yeah.
It's fun though.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to the audience.
Yeah. So if the audience has any more questions, feel free to drop them in. But Petra, do you have any other things you'd like to discuss with Kate?
Sure. You mentioned the fact that you can paint and write a book in your head at the same time, which blew my mind. So just take me through your day. Like, what is your day as a working artist / writer? Look like?
What it's supposed to look like in that what I tell myself I'm going to do every day, and do maybe half of them, is I'd like to start out writing. So I wake up, have my coffee, do all that. I'm not a breakfast person, so I just like make myself eat a banana and then I get on with it. And then I sit down at my computer, and I try to write until kind of 11ish, and that's been my schedule. And then you spend a couple hours responding to emails, doing all that kind of whatever is cropped up since the beginning of the day. And then in the afternoons I like to go paint. So that's, for me, that's the good days when I get sort of, I tap out at about 2 hours of writing. Beyond that, I tend to forget words and what I'm doing and lose it. So so I do that until about 11, and then do other things, and then I can paint for forever. I mean, once I get going, I don't tap out on that quite the way I do as a writer.
And does it cramp up?
Yeah. Oh well, I should say, mentally I can paint forever. Physically I absolutely cannot. So one of the reasons that I started taking writing much more seriously was because I'd had surgery on my arm twice, and I just can't paint 40 hours a week anymore like I used to. And that was when I started writing plays and tried to write screenplays. Failed miserably, but tried, and then started to think, okay, well, I'm obviously doing everything in my power not to travel, so I'm just going to write this damn thing now. And that's how that,
Why it's interesting to see you can paint forever, but you have to tap out of writing after about 2 hours. Is that just because those two lexicons are so different, or it's a different part of your brain?
Yeah, I think it's just the different sort of sides of your brain, and because the painting can be so monotonous, my mind can wander, And I think, because music is such a huge part of this book, and it's a huge part of my life as a painter. I listen to music the whole time when I'm painting, and I think that that's one of the things that helps me too, is to sort of have a longevity as a painter, is that I'm also listening to something as well. So I'm sharing that brain space. Whereas when I'm writing, it's just everything is all being piled into the one sentence.
The audience, anything from the audience? Because I can keep going.
I say keep going.
Okay.
In my professional opinion.
Going back to what you were just talking about listening to music and painting, one thing that I also like to ask creative people is, what kind of rituals are there around your creativity? Like, what do you need to have when you're writing or you're painting to set the scene, to help you work?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm writing, I do listen to music when I write, but it's a very particular playlist, and it's called my writing playlist, and it's about 2 hours long, so it fits into that slot, and I just sort of put it on, and I'm not even really listening. It's kind of meant to be the white noise block that takes everything else out of the equation, because otherwise I think I would need absolute silence, and that's never going to be an option. So the headphones and this particular playlist, I think, really shut everything out for me. And I mean, painting is kind of similar. I mean, with everything, I'm much more open to what I'm listening to when I'm painting. But again, the sound has to be there. I have to hear something. I have to not hear anything else. I'd like to be in control of my environment for sure when I'm working. And that's one of the benefits of living in Maine, is that you certainly have much more control over the space around you, because there's just so much more of it. So, and going for walks, I mean, every time I go out for a walk, I get better work done the next day, that day. The days where I don't go out and get some fresh air and walk. I can feel it in the work.
Yeah, I have a little alarm set every 10 minutes to the hour, every hour during the working day, to remind me to get up and go walk around the block.
Yeah, I probably should have that. Yeah.
Yeah, I resisted having a Fitbit for a long time, but it's saved my butt during the pandemic.
Yeah, I have a feeling that I would probably get obsessed with it. It's just knowing me, but yeah.
You can sort of, it has an infinite number of doohickeys. I'm too old for doohickeys. I have one more question, but I just want to make sure the audience doesn't have anything to ask. Come on, all you out there in Radio Land. Do my job.
Whoa! Sarah's got a paragraph for us.
Oh, okay.
Feel free to answer or not.
Okay.
One of the most jarring experiences reading Superhost was the acclamation to reading the book with you, Kate, writing a middle-aged male central character. Mm-hmm. Did you love Bennett from the start, or did he grow on you? I envision you as a strong feminist. How did that impact how you wrote this not entirely, or at least not immediately lovable man?
Yeah, I think I sort of did love him immediately. And I think it's because he reminds me of a lot of the men in my life who do have incredible difficulty making even the simplest of decisions. So but I was joking with one of my early on jokes with my agent about this book, was because she had the same question. She was like, I know you, and I know, the feminist streak that you have in your day-to-day life. She said, so how did he come about? And I just sort of thought, well, who doesn't want to boss a 55-year-old man around if they have the opportunity? And that's kind of always how I thought about it, was here's a chance for me to get a man to understand all of the things that I want him to understand. And I know that that's going to be a painful journey, but I'm going to, for me and for him, but I'm going to take him on it. And so it did sort of feel like a conversation that I could have with any number of men in my life. And so that, I think that there's, that there was one editor when we were shopping the book out who said, I don't understand why she's decided to write about this, and I, why she wouldn't have a female lead in this book. And honestly, because I just didn't see how I could affect, number one, I mean, the basis of feminism is that we should be able to write about whatever the hell we want to write about. So, and then, I wanted to have the chance to, I use male palettes in my paintings, every day. And I think I wanted to have that same experience as a writer, to sort of be able to dig deep into how the male brain might work, or how I might think it works. That was a rewarding experience. Whether or not I got it right, of course, is up for every man to decide.
I feel like it's a sad commentary on men, that in order to get one to understand the things you needed him to understand, you had to invent him.
Yeah, that's true.
How are we on time? I can ask my follow-up, or
you can ask. Go ahead. Last question.
The one that I always ask people, because it always turns out something that I didn't expect, which is, what do you want people, when they read the last page and they close the book and they put it down, what do you want them to take away from it?
I hope mostly that people relate to the sense of loneliness in the book. I think that's what, for me, more than anything, I wanted to communicate, because we're all living in this world where we're supposed to be connecting in all these different ways on all these different platforms. And Airbnb is one of them. It's one of these things that's supposed to make our lives easier, and often doesn't. And I think most of us are pretty lonely most of the time, and this book was meant to come out in a time when there wasn't a pandemic, and so it's actually more of a message now than I think it's more of a poignant message now than it was, even when I originally thought the book was going to come out, because we all are kind of, I think, much, much more in tune with just how isolated we are now. But I think even before all of this happened, we all sort of operate in a fairly isolated way. And then when part of your safety net falls away, you think, oh crap, I've been ignoring everybody else. I haven't been keeping up. I don't know what I'm doing. And all of these characters, I think, are in that position where something has fallen away, something unplanned has happened, and now they realize that they don't have a safety net. And I certainly feel that way, in my life. And so I hope other people do too. And it's really about getting moving again. How can you get yourself unstuck?
A great book for the pandemic, whether or not it was actually supposed to come out now. Well, thank you so much. This is a wonderful
Petra. Yeah,
so fun. I'm sorry about my cats.
Oh, don't worry about it. I love cats, so it was fine by me.
One of the great benefits of Zoom is meeting everybody's pets. Like, there's a secret cat lady underground in publishing, and so.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us. Thank you for agreeing to this wonderful event. And I hope everyone who attended had a great time. I did. I loved listening to both of you. So thank you both so much for coming. And I hope we get to see each other in the future.
In person, hopefully.
Yes, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both so much.
Yeah, have a good night, everyone.
Good night.